I'm super excited because if you are in SaaS or in tech or in marketing and you don't know Kyle Poyar, you are living under a rock, my friend. Okay, this guy, I don't even know how he does it. I kind of got to pick his brain a little bit yesterday, but he knows the intricate details about how companies grow, and he like grills his interview guests. He like has all these ways to get like data. I have no idea how he does it, but he can tell you like how some of the like most successful companies, the most successful startups have grown. You know, what are the specific things that they do, specific tactics, what are their playbooks, and he has this like wealth of knowledge in his head. So I really wanted to bring him here because I know that, you know, a ton of our CEO, founder, and operational operational leader attendees probably want to learn from Kyle's brain. And he is at an event today. He's actually going to go live on stage in like, I don't know, like I think 45 minutes. So very kind that he's like, you know, jammed this in his day. Kyle, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, I'm in Ottawa today where it's actually snowing.
Oh my God.
Which was not expecting that, but virtual is better than being outside and trying to be productive, right? It's all about operational excellence and efficiency. So I'm modeling that myself.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for doing this. For those of you who don't know, Ottawa is in Canada and it's in the snow belt, so it's yucky weather all year long. Cool. Let's jump into it. I guess like I just want to like talk about this word productivity for a second. It's just, you know, in some ways I kind of feel like it's a word that can like trigger people. Like I think I'm kind of one of those people. The reason I ask is because I'm at this company, I work at ClickUp, and, you know, our company is in this giant space of productivity, and, you know, all of us that live in, you know, that work here live and breathe this stuff. And as a newbie to this space, I feel like, and I say this to my boss all the time, like no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be productive today and I'm going to get my team to be productive today. Like it's not like the first thought that most humans have, even if you're like highly efficient and, you know, just like operationally prone. So yeah, just open-ended question. Like, how do you think about it? How do people in your vicinity, particularly like folks that you've talked with, you know, people at successful companies, like how do they think about it? And what is productivity to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I was thinking about this. So, you know, when you hear the word productivity, you immediately think about like your own life, right? Like how quickly are you checking off the to-do list, right? Are you able to respond to all those emails and get to inbox zero? Like it ends up being very sort of like task or activity focused. But stepping back, like from working at a VC firm and working with a number of successful companies, productivity really means that you're able to build an organization that's able to generate a lot of revenue in a lean way, essentially. So I think about it in terms of revenue per employee, for example, and being able to decouple growth from just adding more and more headcount, right? Because that's how you're able to show that you're actually becoming a more productive organization. And so what that means is you need to have the right strategy, right? You need to have the right people in place. They need to be organized the right way to have impact. And then you need to empower them to be really productive within those roles and to execute on that strategy. But ultimately, if you're able to figure it out, you're able to build a business that is really resilient in terms of like profitability profile, right? Requirements for fundraising and so on. But you're also able to out-innovate competition by shipping products faster, shipping marketing campaigns faster, and you're able to build sort of a foundation for a really successful company.
Yeah. I pulled this quote from the SaaS benchmark report that you just released last week. Great report, by the way. I'll link it in comments here so that people can grab it. But yeah, here you say, I think these are your words, that the North Star metric has become ARR per full-time employee. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and why that specifically? Why did you end up on that?
Totally. Well, there's so many different metrics that you can look at to say whether a business is efficient, right? You could look at the overall profit margin, right, or burn rate for a high growth venture backed company. You could look at burn multiple, which is like how much new ARR are you adding versus how much cash are you burning to get there. But the metric of ARR per employee, I like it because it's simple, right? You don't need to be a CFO to calculate it. Just about anyone on your team understands what it means. And it's a metric that you can't hide from, right? There's no complicated financial engineering to do around it. And it's relatively easy to see how you're doing over time and how you're doing relative to peers. So for public companies, they report on their revenue. It's also clear how many employees they have, right? And so you can benchmark yourself relatively well against other people. And so I love that simplicity. And then when you think in terms of ARR per employee, anytime you're thinking about adding to the team, you have to really be clear, hey, is this actually going to help us towards this North Star, right? Of, are we going to be able to build a more productive business with more revenue per employee by adding this headcount, right? And so it starts kind of getting you down this mindset, not just of, all right, we need, 8 people in marketing for every 12 people in sales, right? And these ratios are these artificial sort of math that we use around growing organizations. And we think more in terms of zero-based budget and getting really clear about what impact looks like for different roles. And that's been the case in sales roles for a while. We've thought about quota, right? How much revenue is this sales rep going to help drive, right? Quota attainment rates, time to quota. So we've always thought about that for sales facing employees, but there's now more and more employees that are not quota carrying reps in an organization. And those folks could be in a go-to-market function, or they could be in a product or G&A function. And this sort of mentality helps us think kind of around the bigger picture, around the organization we're building, and whether we're building something that's getting better and better over time.
Yeah, totally. I love these 2 charts as well that I saw in the report, CAC payback, which I think, I don't know if this is a phenomenon just in the last couple of years with increasing pressure on efficiency and profitability, but this has become super important to almost all companies I've observed. Maybe we can talk a bit about that. And then, I'd love to also just get an understanding of this second chart that you showcased about the, where the spend comes from and what the categories are.
Yeah, great question. So on CAC payback, the first thing, so what CAC payback is it's how fast it takes months for you to pay off the cost of acquiring a customer. Right. So you have to think about the cost of acquiring a customer pretty broad, right? There's mostly sales and marketing in there, but there might be other things you're doing. Founders might be involved in selling, right? There's also fully loaded costs of employees to consider. And then when you think about paying off those costs, you have to be also mindful of looking at that CAC payback on a gross margin adjusted basis. So, right, how much time it takes for essentially the profits of the customer to pay off those acquisition costs. And when we think in that way, it gives us a pretty good sense for, are we able to, spend $1 to make ideally more than $1, right? Or if someone gives you $1 to spend now, how fast are you able to pay that back to them, and ideally pay it back with interest? And if you can pay it back relatively quickly, you can take that $1 and you can go get more and more and more customers, right? And ultimately scale your business faster, outcompete competitors faster. And so CAC payback is a super helpful metric. And I think that it's both helpful in aggregate as well as it's helpful relative to other metrics out there, right? Some marketers will just look at customer acquisition costs, and they'll have a hurdle rate for CAC on a marketing program spend or cost per click that layers up to CAC. But if you're not adjusting for quality and the outcomes of those customers, you end up having bad decision making, right? Because you optimize to lower CAC at all costs as opposed to thinking about the speed at which you're paying off that CAC. So CAC payback period is super helpful efficiency metric on the go-to-market side. But then on the right-hand metric, that's just looking at how costs in an organization break down in different departments or functions. And so in the early days of a company, a lot of the costs are in R&D, right? So they're in product and engineering resources. That's the biggest line item of spend for an early stage company. And then as you grow, you start getting relatively more efficient in terms of R&D costs as a percentage of revenue. but then costs in terms of sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue actually stay elevated, and continue to be elevated, especially for high growth businesses. And if you add up all of these metrics here on that chart, you might notice that it adds up to above 100% here. And so in many of these cases for software companies, they are ultimately spending more than they're generating in terms of revenue. And we want to understand, hey, is that actually healthy? Which it might be if there's a really healthy CAC payback period, healthy lifetime value of a customer, right? Then we're spending money that we know we're going to get back in the future. But if you don't have those metrics like CAC payback period in a good place, and you're spending at these elevated rates, that's when things start to become a concern, because you'll be spending too much money, right? You'll be in a position of needing debt capital, or might even be running out of cash given that kind of spending profile.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, this is like, we talk about this at ClickUp like every day. Like, it's like we want to grow revenue, but we want to do it in a cost. So like, it's like revenue is going up and the payback period is going down, and we like measure that across different segments. So like, how do we do for SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise? And like, we have different tolerances for each of those buckets. That's awesome. Thanks for explaining that. So I guess the big question, the meat of this session, is this question. I want to know, what are your observations around companies that are successful? I want to know what you think they have in common. There's got to be like a couple of things that you've observed after talking to all these like founders and CEOs, and I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first thought is that when you think about achieving big ambitions, the old way of doing it was spend months or quarters, planning, doing a bunch of research, investing in product and design and marketing and so on, and having this big reveal of something that you're super excited about and hoping that it takes off in the market. The modern way, right, a more effective way in my experience, is to ship quickly and iterate. You should be looking at the fastest way to develop learnings to help get something better and better. And often that's shipping before you're totally comfortable with what you're working on. And we even do this at OpenView as a VC firm. And so our marketing team has our marketing has weekly sprints where we plan out the backlog for what we're going to take on that week. We make sure that's really prioritized for the highest impact thing that we can do. And we hold ourselves accountable to like, what can we actually get done this week? What can we get done next week? That is ideally either making impact around the metrics that we care about, or generating a learning that's going to help us make impact in the future. And it's that speed to learning and then ultimately speed to impact that allows you to make something better and then be able to put it on autopilot, right? So that it ideally works in perpetuity. But I find that that's a motion that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially folks that are perfectionist or, maybe overly data driven, I should say. Like, we obviously want to be data informed, but there's sometimes paralysis by the data and not actually shipping and getting real life feedback from real life customers. And so if you're not a little bit uncomfortable with what you're shipping, you're probably, going down the route of being perfectionist rather than getting something out the door and getting learnings on it. And this comes up, constantly for us and our team, especially trying to balance delivering really high quality content, reports, interactions with founders in our portfolio and elsewhere, but then also making sure that we're able to be a really lean organization, right? We don't have a ton of heads. I'm an operating partner and I still write a newsletter every single week, put out content every week. Like, we try to make sure that we're able to be doing a lot with a really small group of people. And so that's a big part of how we do it.
I love that velocity of learning thing. I got my first taste of that myself at my last job. Just a little side story. I had joined a company that was pre-product, pre-revenue. Like, they had zero, like nothing. We had nothing. We kind of had this idea for a product. And so, I'd spent like 4 or 5 months like building like the value prop and the website and the blah, 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 and like what the ICPs would be. And, just like these hypotheses. And like, we went to market in September of 2019. And like a couple of months had gone by and we really didn't have that much money in the bank. And like, I was like freaking out. I was like, every day I was like, oh, today is the day I'm going to get fired. And I was like hyperventilating. I think my boss caught on to that. So the CEO sits me down and he said, listen, do not worry about money. Do not worry about revenue. Worry about your velocity of learning. Can you every single week learn something big that'll compound over time? And that'll lead us to revenue. So can you optimize for that? And I'm like looking at him being like, what is this guy talking about? But like, that was like freedom. Like that gave me the ability to like actually make the right decisions, because now I wasn't chasing this like imaginary thing, which was just like a hypothesis on the back of a napkin. I was actually chasing like feedback. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's so important. And you can apply that same lesson, not just to like company building, but like the day-to-day activities as well. On that note, like you kind of mentioned your marketing team. When you plan the goals out for your team, do you actually say like, hey, like, of course we want to reach this target, but like, here are the lessons that we want to learn? Like, do you actually outline that as a goal or an objective for them as well?
So the way our team is structured, everyone has a KPI that they're oriented towards as the outcome we're trying to generate or trying to get to. And the KPI, there's usually, in terms of KPIs, overall volume KPI and a cost per KPI. So we look at both things. And then in terms of the learnings, what we're trying to do is really take things that we know work well and scale them into production so that they're applied across, the largest possible audience that can be exposed to that thing. And then we're trying to run rapid experimentation to either reach an audience we weren't able to convert through what's already in production, or lower the cost per conversion, right? Find new tools to put into production in the future. And so anytime we're running an experiment, essentially, it's which of those two buckets does it fall into, and what's the hypothesis of why we're testing this in the first place. And so we're always really clear on, not just how do we scale the things that have already worked, but how do we keep finding new things that innovate for us, and what are we trying to validate with this new thing? What's our hypothesis around it? How many conversions do we expect out of it, and at what cost per conversion if it all goes well? And then we're able to track the results of it to be able to say, hey, look, this is actually working. Let's go actually scale this further. Or, hey, this didn't work, but we think that if we adjust these few things, we can actually have more impact. Let's try it again next week with this slight tweak. And that works so well, whether it's exploring channels like LinkedIn advertising, which we actually found works surprisingly well in terms of reaching a software founder audience, but with something we, as a VC, like we don't normally do a lot of paid advertising. But that's the kind of thing that we tried in this model. It didn't work perfectly the first ad we put out, right? But it was all about adapting the audience, adapting the offer, adapting the message, and getting those learnings to get something that we could ultimately move into production. And so that's something that we were able to do within a matter of weeks, right? Because of the speed of shipping, as opposed to trying to have the perfect creative, the perfect copy, the perfect offer, and wait to actually test something in the market until we were there. And I've seen this. So, we talked about small examples, right, on the marketing side. I've even seen this in our portfolio. So one of our portfolio companies is a company called Jump Cloud. I featured their CEO in one of my newsletter interviews for Growth Unhinged. And before they had a product, when they just had ideas, they actually wrote, I believe it was 6 to 8 white papers around essentially different problems that they might solve. And then they amplified those white papers through paid ads to see what was the click-through rate and how many people that landed on those white papers actually took a next step to say, hey, I'm actually interested in this beta product. I want to talk to you about being a design partner. And what Jump Cloud was able to do was able to understand exactly what the type of demand was for different kinds of products they could build, as well as attract high quality design partners to help them go build that thing. But that's something that, most companies aren't doing marketing around a product that doesn't exist, right? And using that to get these kinds of learnings that can help them build a really great prototype.
Yeah, that's a good hack. Like, yeah, advertise it, get it out in the world first, see what kind of demand you have, and then build the product. If you can afford, if you can do that, that's amazing. Cool. On to observation number 2. So let's see, manage teams towards outcomes rather than activities. I love that.
Yeah, we talked about this a bit with our marketing team, but in my view, there's a tendency to focus on the activities because that's the thing that people have most immediate control over. You don't have always control over the outcomes, but you can control what you do to get there. And so on the marketing side, we might have said, hey, we're going to work on 3 blog posts a week, a newsletter a week. We're going to have one big tier 1 report that we publish in a quarter, maybe one tier 2 report. That's what the goals used to be like. And now we get much clearer around what are the outcomes that we're trying to drive, right? Which is generally either a founder audience or there are other audiences that are really important for us from a marketing perspective. So what's the audience? What's the kind of part of the journey that we think is really important to have impact on? And then make sure we have really clear KPIs around those outcomes, again, with both a volume number and a cost per conversion number. And then we put one owner on that outcome and try to make sure that people aren't spread thin across different goals or different audiences. We want people to really be able to do minimal context switching and be able to have creativity and autonomy over the different ways to reach that goal. And they recognize very quickly that it can't just be their activities that hit that goal. It's ultimately bringing together the sort of resources at their disposal to identify experiments, right? Identify what we're trying to learn and then kind of orchestrate that. But it's been a mindset change for sure. And it's something we kind of constantly have to work to get better on because the pull is always to go back to activities, right? Like that's much easier and it's harder to kind of keep raising the bar higher and higher for outcomes.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think, I think that's why there's like a lot of people in the world that love OKRs or, sort of like almost like what we use at ClickUp because our team is so big in marketing and growth. Like we actually use something called the priority system. So everybody has P0s and P1s, and then sometimes those are shared. So I might have a priority 0. That's a shared priority with someone else. And so we're all accountable for that outcome together, which is actually really great. Cool. Yeah, I love that. Let's see. You have, more observations. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, the next one is very related. It's giving folks the ability to act as autonomously as possible. And so you should ideally be able to assemble teams where they are closest to the customer, right? Or to the outcome that you're working on. And they, within reason, they can be able to drive decision-making or drive experimentation that allows them to move really fast, right? It also means they're fully focused on one thing versus constantly switching context. And it means they don't have wasted effort. So the learnings are contained within the teams, the activities are contained within the teams. And so for my marketing group in particular, in order to achieve this, we've had to do a lot more cross-training, right? Instead of having someone owning email, that person has now trained everyone to own email, right? And you created a process around getting email approvals. So we're not, sending a bunch of bad emails out, but everyone should be able to have access to reporting or be able to run reports to be able to help them track their goal, right? Everyone needs to be able to be empowered to do the things that get them to the outcome. And so that's been really important for us to help folks be able to move faster. And I see this with software companies too across the funnel. So oftentimes the funnel is more like an assembly line. You have product building this thing that they think people are going to want, and then marketing trying to get people interested in that thing, ideally becoming leads or maybe signing up for the product. And then you have sales trying to call on those leads to try to get them to buy, and then a handoff to maybe onboarding specialists and then customer success and so on and so forth, right? It's a very assembly line oriented process. And what I'm seeing is that misses out on bigger picture changes that can drive a lot better outcomes and more efficiency. And so I interviewed Plio's VP of product growth recently on Growth Unhinged. And one thing that they've moved to is more cross-functional teams around a domain or a kind of customer problem space. So that customer problem space, for example, could be, how do we capture demand from folks that are on the website and we want to ultimately get them to buy? And there's a product growth element to that. There's a marketing element, there's a sales element. And you start looking at things like, oh, maybe we could put an interactive demo on the website so that we have more product qualified leads so that sales is talking to higher quality folks. Or we should actually ask questions during the sign up process that help us qualify which accounts are ready for sales and which ones aren't. Or maybe we should run an more automated email program so that based on different activities folks do in the product, we have some sort of smart automations that either progress them down their product path or get them interested in a sales conversation. So sales isn't looking at that data manually and writing their own emails for all the things that are happening in the product. So it starts to bring together all of these different creative ways to tackle the thing that you care about beyond just telling people to work harder, call more people, write more emails. There's often a better way that you can unlock by bringing teams together that have different expertise in different areas, but can own a problem space together.
Got it. Lovely. Okay, and the last one.
The last one is a constant reminder to me and to everyone else, is that the playbook to grow your business this year and next year doesn't look like it did in 2014. And so I think that we're all looking for ways to incorporate AI in how we operate, right, to be more efficient. But in my mind, it's not even really just AI. And often AI is a code word for just implementing technology and automation. And so for our team, that's certainly the case. And then when I look at companies out in the market, the next generation of companies are rethinking a lot of the old ways of doing things. And so I featured a company called Thena, which is a seed stage company in the customer kind of support and success space. And Thena has all of their outbound emailing is done via automation with one person behind a keyboard. And they're able to generate the output of about 5 to 10 reps without hiring any sort of outbound BDRs or SDRs. And that's because there's so much great technology available right now to identify companies in the ICP, then identify who are the right decision makers at those companies, to be able to personalize emails at scale to those companies and those decision makers based on different intent data, and then to be able to measure the results of that work and then be able to continually optimize it over time. And so that's an example, right, of taking things that would normally be done by 5 to 10 people and having one person behind a keyboard instead. And that's the kind of story that I think we're going to see more and more of going forward, because the companies that are succeeding in this next year aren't necessarily going to follow the old playbook that everyone's following, right? So it doesn't necessarily make you stand out. And it's just no longer the most efficient thing that you could do.
Yeah. Folks, we actually only have 5-6 minutes left with Kyle. So if you haven't popped your questions in yet, please do that in the Q&A tab. I'm going to monitor it closely. But Kyle, in the meantime, maybe you can kind of walk us through just some like cool companies, case studies that you can think of that have sort of followed these principles that you've walked us through. Any companies, Portco or otherwise, come to mind?
Yeah, well, I already talked about a few. Plio is a really interesting example in terms of moving towards cross-functional teams around a domain space and coming up with so many creative solutions, right, with that type of unlock that ultimately, you think it's in some ways like more people working on a problem, but it's able to bring down CAC payback period by having really smarter solutions that aren't just around people. I've also had the pleasure of talking to folks at Miro and been working with them on pieces that share more about some of the internal operations of Miro around their growth programs. And Miro's head of growth design, or I should say former head of growth design, talked about the process that they've used to run onboarding experiments really to get new users to find value quickly. And some of the big bets that they've made over the last number of years, where they really spent tons of time on research, on design, on user interviews to come up with what they would think was the best possible approach. Almost none of those big bets paid off on their own, right? It was much more efficient and more effective to make smart iterations, launch quickly, right? Develop learnings based on those iterations, make a second iteration, make a third iteration based on those learnings. And those would ultimately compound in terms of the results that they would generate. And so there's a lesson, even in a company as successful as Miro, many of the big bang initiatives or kind of big grand reveals just don't ultimately move the needle in the way that you expect. And so it's better to create a culture of experimentation, right? Using data to inform decision making, but really optimizing for that speed of learning to be able to get to the outcomes that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, Miro is actually speaking later today on a panel as well, so maybe they'll unpack a bit of that. Those are awesome examples. One question that's come through is how do you, I'm trying to rephrase a little bit because there's a couple of similar ones. How do you think about, I guess, accountability inside a company? What role does accountability play in the success of a company? Employee accountability, I think, is what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, in terms of accountability, the first thing is you need to have something that's fairly objective to use to hold people accountable, right? That's why it can be very black and white if someone is performing or not performing. And without those, it ends up feeling very subjective to both the employee and to the leadership team. And also there's just not a whole lot of visibility beyond maybe that person's manager of like what that person does and why that's valuable to the organization. So that to the extent that you can align people around something that's impactful and seen as impactful in the organization, and there's KPIs that they have towards that impact, that's a really great way of designing an accountable organization. But with my team, I mean, I don't care that much necessarily if they exactly hit the target or the goal that we set for that quarter. And I mean, I care, but like I would rather have someone that is pointing out that we're behind target, coming up with more creative ideas, vetting those ideas with more people, finding ways to run like more experiments or generate more learnings and just try new things versus maintaining that dated playbook. And I think about it as the behavior that someone demonstrates in order to try to get us to that next level as an organization. That's the accountability that I ultimately care about more so than the exact number itself. And so creating this culture of accountability where people feel so invested in the outcomes that they're going to really treat it as if they're the ultimate owner, right, for that, and they're going to act like an owner.
Yeah, that's a great answer. There's a whole essay right there. Thank you. Awesome. I think we're at 30 seconds to the next session, so I'm going to end here. Kyle, thank you so much. Where can people reach you? I know Growth Unhinged for sure, like that's your newsletter. If you're a business owner of any kind or owner of any kind or a department leader, whatever, you should follow his newsletter, which is amazing for all sorts of knowledge and tidbits. But where can people find you if they have questions?
Yeah, I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm a little addicted to LinkedIn, and I put something out there almost every day. So follow me on LinkedIn or send me a message. And then if you're in Ottawa for SaaS North, come say hi.